Hello and welcome to the AgCulture Podcast, where we cultivate tomorrow by inspiring agripreneurs and ag innovators through real-life perspectives in agriculture. I'm Paul Windemuller, your host on this journey of exploration and growth. On today's episode, I interviewed Dr. Torsten Hemme. Torsten started out his career as a researcher, which ultimately led into his main business that he spent the last 20 years working in. I personally have met Torsten at several different dairy events around the world, from World Dairy Expo, where he's spoken, to the Global Dairy Platform Summit, to many other international dairy conferences where he's had the privilege to speak. So I've gotten a lot out of his talks that he's had and really have enjoyed looking at the information that his business has put out over the years, IFCN. We'll get into discussions about what IFCN is in this episode, and we're also going to talk about some of the other things that Torsten's involved in as well today, now that he's retired out of that original business. So he's a wealth of knowledge, respected around the world for his insights into the global dairy markets. So I hope you enjoy this episode with Torsten Hemme. Hey everyone, before we get started with today's episode, I just wanted to take a second to thank our sponsors, Bank Barn. I love these guys and what they're doing to streamline banking in agriculture. They're helping to connect farmers and lenders so that today's farmers have more options no matter the size of operation. Check out bankbarn.io to learn more. Torsten Hemme, welcome to the AgCulture Podcast today. It's so good to have you. And for those that don't know Torsten, he is an entrepreneur, researcher, and global dairy expert. So welcome.
Thanks, Paul. Happy to be with you here.
Well, great. Let's get right into it. You've got a rich history and a rich background in the dairy industry. So if you want to just give us a little bit of background for the audience, what really got you into dairy in the first place, and what's some of the background of the roles that you've had in the dairy industry globally?
Yeah, I grew up on a dairy farm in northern Germany, and this farm has been in our family the last 400 years, right? So there's some dairy DNA, dairy in my DNA. And that was probably the first starting point. The second starting point is my parents loved what they do. So I loved what they do.
Yeah.
And I found this quite remarkable. Sometimes in life you ask yourself, why have you done things? And I've seen a lot of farmers where they told their children, don't go into farming because it's useless, then they don't go. But if they run a profitable business and enjoy what they do, it guides you into this direction. So that was a point two. The point three was, I had the challenge not being the first son, but the second. And the second son doesn't inherit the farm. So I need to go to university, study, and then I connected to dairy and built after my PhD research a company called IFCN.
Great. What can you give us a little bit of background on IFCN? What is IFCN?
Well, some people say IFCN is a crazy idea, and it was. IFCN today is a global network connecting dairy economists from over 100 countries and serving over 130 agribusiness companies and also governments in making better decisions in dairy by understanding the global dairy picture much better. So why was that a crazy idea? When I started my work as a researcher, we didn't had an accounting system even in Germany to compare farms from northern Germany with southern Germany. And then I came up with the idea saying, why don't we build something that works on global level, right? That was crazy. But I was lucky and had some funding from a public funded research organization called Thunen Institute, funded by the Ministry of Agriculture. Then I went to Texas A&M University and then developed basically a kind of a model typical, which allows me to analyze now every dairy farm in the world, regardless how it's set up. and I very fast get comparable results. So that was a starting point of first understanding farming systems. And then we added to this farming system knowledge the dairy sector knowledge, and then you have basically the markets and the farm economics and the supply chains, and then you know what's going on.
So give us some background. What made you come up with that idea for IFCN? You said it was a pretty crazy thing, right? So what gave you that crazy idea? What was the catalyst for that?
Well, I was when I studied, I was not too happy because it was not too relevant, practical relevant. So I tried in semester holidays always to work on farms internationally. And when I was working on farms, I was excited and was digging in some data, some numbers, and so on. But I never could compare the farms. It started even I was working in Belgium, in UK, in US, in New Zealand, in Germany, and it doesn't make sense. And it was somehow my own curiosity that drove me to. I want to better understand the global dairy world, and you know how difficult it is to compare milk solids in kg, right? It's a mess, right?
Yeah.
And still is a mess, but once you fixed it, it works.
So talk us through the development process of IFCN. What did that look like? I mean, that was kind of the beginning of your entrepreneurial journey, right?
Well, the first journey was a public funded researcher at the Thun Institute, and then the PhD was done, and we were running out of funding, but we had a great idea. And those days, I was in the mind of a public funded researcher who thought once you have a great idea, you get funding, and if you do good for the world, you get funding. And sadly, this didn't happen. Now I must say I was very lucky that no one gave me a bunch of money those days, because it would have ruined my career. In a lot of cases, I've seen a lot of people who initiate large research projects. We built a network, ABC. They collect a lot of money, and then once the project is over, the network is collapsing. So what was the starting point was for me the shift of a public funded researcher to a serving person, creating customer value for people in the dairy world. And when you're on the mind shift of a public funded researcher, this is quite a big step.
Yeah.
So now, what is your customer, and what is his problem, and how do you help him? So it takes a while, right? And so what happens is I became, after doing my PhD, I became somehow of head of product. I thought about, okay, let's what could researchers in different countries need, so they don't have money, but they have information and data. So what is a win-win for them, or create a value for them in a way that they get more out than they put into the network? So that was customer type number one. Customer type number two are all the agribusiness companies. So for each dairy processor, buying the milk is the biggest cost in their profit and loss account. Most dairy farm input companies are dairy specialized and need knowledge on what farms to serve and how to serve those farms. So I realized that they have some questions which I could answer by connecting the researchers. So that was somehow the business and the funding model. And then we grew step by step without external funding, just out of own cash flow and projects. And by currently, the IFCN has around 20 people and is active by now in over 100 countries.
Awesome. You mind? I'm kind of curious to hear some of the specific examples of research projects that you guys have done. You mind sharing some of those?
Well, where to start? I think one core research project is that we are benchmarking dairy farming systems once a year and write something what people call the Dairy Bible. So we write a book describing the dairy world. It's an orange book. So that is a core project. Another core project is we move into, together with researchers, identifying what is in my region the future farming model, which ensures competitive milk for the dairy processor, at the same time allowing the farmers to pay the bills, or even more, attracting the next generation farmer into the business. This is a tricky question. We did that for farmers in India, for processors in India, Sri Lanka, Peru, etc., etc. So that's a processor project. Then you have a farm input company project. So farm input companies come to us and ask, well, Torsten, we have a product. You have a new product here, but we don't know how what the value it makes on the farm. Saying, okay, let's show us what you have. We simulate that in our models, and we could say, oh, this brings the farmer $100 per year, $10 per year, or nothing. So and that helped them in their business development, for example.
Okay, great.
Paul, there's other issues. Maybe touch that later on as well. So IFCN is also doing forecasts of milk prices the next 15, 18 months to help people to budget the next year. Farmers, also companies. And the same thing with IFCN is doing forecasts for the dairy world until 2050. Because that's something what you need if you plan strategically for your own country or farm.
Yeah.
We talked about golden times, right? At the moment, everyone is a little bit depressed in dairy, and I think I'm the only person talking about golden times for dairy. So
you're optimistic about that. So tell us more about why you see the optimism there.
I first tell you why we had golden times in dairy. And we had golden times in dairy since the year 2000 because we grew milk demand and production by 40%, and the world milk price increased by 60%. That doesn't mean that the US price or the European price increased, but we had a phase of tremendous growth. Now, in our current forecast, we predict that until 2050, dairy demand will increase another 40%. On 40% on the current milk volume today is that we need to produce 4 times the milk volume of US in the next 30 years.
So how do you see that happening given the restraints to growth in a lot of the developed dairy markets in the world going forward?
Actually, we don't see that happening.
You don't?
No, we see structure. I'm not talking about the next market swing, which goes a little bit up or down. I'm just look strategically in a 5-10 year horizon. And a lot of people talk that demand will grow faster than milk supply. And because at the current milk price, with the current interest rates, and with the more pressure on environmental issues, etc., and all the carbon uncertainty, it is probably not feasible to invest a lot in future dairy farming under this current milk price.
Right.
So what will change first? Demand will outperform supply, milk price will rise, and then hopefully we get additional volume activated somewhere in the world. So the good news for farmers is that structurally milk price need to rise.
Right. That's good news for us as farmers. Where do you see that growth happening in the future? Have you looked into that?
Every country has a function of milk volume over milk price. So, for example, if I think at the moment, at the current milk price, or with a slight increase of additional milk price, do we see more milk in Europe and New Zealand? No. Do we see more milk in US? Probably. So under the scenario of a moderate milk price increase, Northern US is probably a gifted region for additional milk volume, number one. Probably the growth we would activate here is probably not enough to compensate for the gap, or let's say some people even talk about that we lose milk in Europe or lose milk in New Zealand. So the question is, when you raise the bar of the milk price, where do you activate milk pools? And in that sense, I think we might maintain the milk volume in Europe, in the EU, or have a little bit of growth, but not that much. So do we get more milk out of Oceania? some people have been thinking that we move from grazing to confined system and increase milk yield with the same number of cows, or milk volume with the same number of cows. Most likely not feasible at the moment. So where are the big pockets of additional milk? Would then be the second phase is probably South America if you get the macroeconomics right. And the third pillar is if you increase milk prices significantly and have basically very large farms like in China, which have a direct connection to the consumer and a very premium milk price. So currently, in the past, the milk price in China was 50% higher than in US, for example. Then you could afford farming systems even in climates and territories which are not really competitive.
Do you see much of the demand getting taken up by plant-based type products, milk replacement type products that have been out there?
Yeah, interesting question. We had a IFCN conference on that topic of special type of milks in 2019, and the message we found those days is the noise are bigger than the facts. So
that's a good way to put it.
There is a lot of talks of dairy alternatives, but at the moment they have not taken up or depressed milk demand growth. The interesting thing, in IFCN, we like to look on the numbers. Number one is what happens to per capita dairy demand in US the last 10 years.
It's continued to grow.
People are drinking 10% more milk per capita in calculating on all dairy products than 10 years ago. Yep. 10% growth per capita on dairy demand in US. And of course, liquid milk is going down, cheese is going up, and overall, people drink more milk, consume more dairy in US. The same in Europe. And of course, the same happens in other countries. So, of course, plant alternatives, oat milks, etc., are growing also at a high percentage rate. But sometimes we are not fully sure how much they take out dairy demand or water demand. It's not fully clear. That's point number one. Point number two, we looked into the economics of leading dairy and meat companies like Oatly and Beyond Meat, and I was really surprised. I knew that consumers fund these companies by paying much more for the product, but I didn't know how much investors are funding this boom. So Oatly and Beyond Meat never made profits, and they lost 95% of their share price in the last 3 to 4 years.
So that would tell you that consumers don't really value their products, nor do the investors anymore.
Well, the consumers paid them, the investors paid them, the consumers overpaid the product, the investor lost money, and I think this industry was a little bit overstating on the image and the PR side, and has not delivered what it promised.
Yeah, so you don't think that's much of a threat to to filling that dairy demand outside of true dairy products because of that?
I think it's a trend you need to carefully watch, but you shouldn't. It shouldn't freeze you in acting, right? Okay. I talked to farmers who said, "Look, with all this alternative and vegan trends, I should go out of dairy because it doesn't make sense anymore." I think this perception is just wrong. And when I'm talking about golden times for dairy, there are not too many people talking positive for something which is really good.
So moving forward, you're talking about the next 3 to 5 years of filling this demand. Do you see farmers in, say, the U.S. where there's potential growth still happening, even at the high interest rates, even at the high upfront capital costs compared to historic values, that people will still invest in? And should they invest at those high values now for the potential in the near future?
Maybe let's look again back 20 years. A lot of farmers who did invest, similar like you, right? and who have been growing their farm in the US. Some of them have become very wealthy and very, very successful, even though in sometimes very bumpy roads,
Yep.
right? So does that stop? I don't think so. So the key question is, on what milk price do you budget your calculation?
Mm-hmm.
And do we consider and from the, I think you are talking in hundredweights. So you had $17-18 per hundredweight as a long-term trend in the past somehow. Do you now budget on 18, or you budget on 20, or you budget on 25? With the current feed prices. So if you budget on 25, you should, of course, invest significantly. But the key uncertainty is now, how much increase of milk price do we see at the given feed price scenario?
Anything else on the global dairy markets in the near future that you think we should touch on that would be good to touch on?
Well, for me, the most critical part for every dairy region is a little bit of piece of engineering world. So if you want to benefit on this global demand rise, you need basically future proven farming systems. So what is a future proven farming system? And there are probably some criteria. So you need to meet the environmental requirements in that region. Point number one. Point number two, it need to be attractive for the next generation who wants to become a dairy farmer. It's not a problem to inherit a dairy farm with 100, 200, 500 cows and run it without loans, right? That's not a future-proven farming model. But if you want to start a farm, what is a farming model where a young entrepreneur can add in and pay the bills and pay off the loans? So, and it need to be good for the planet. It need to be attractive for the next generation dairy farmer, and it need to be accepted by the consumers. So this is an engineering task, and it need to be competitive at a given milk price level, which is the old level plus X. So this is a typical engineering task, and if you are a processor or a farmer, you can decide do that on your own. Or if I would be a processor, and especially a cooperative, I would spend much more resources in fixing that question with the talented people you have in your region, saying, what is your future proving farming model? Once you have it, you have milk, you have competitive milk, farmers grow, processors grow, and you are a winning dairy region. If you don't do it or don't find it, the trend is the opposite. You lose 3 to 5% of milk every year, and processors have a damn hard time to compete with the remaining milk, which makes them, of course, very non-competitive, and it's very not comfortable situation. And a lot of processors and cooperatives could do much better on that than they do today.
Do you think there's another way to do it besides the processor cooperative level, or do you think that's really where it has to start?
The most advanced dairy farmers do it by themselves anyhow. Mm-hmm. And they have done it. Right? The question is that enough to keep dairy region and milk volumes to a level which is in its potential? So then the question, who's beyond the very leading dairy farmers who do it for themselves anyhow, is the next person who can take the lead? Is it a processor? Is it a cooperative? Is it a farm input company? Is it the bank? Is it government, etc., etc.? If I would be a farmer, I would request this strategic work from my processor, because it's an investment once you do once every 3 to 5 years to do a setup, what works, what doesn't work, and then you roll it out. Farmers know that it could work, bankers know that it could work, advisors have directions, farm input companies could adjust their systems, and the thing can be rolling out. So it needs, it's somehow we need somehow. You can also take levy money for that one. It needs just strategic investments to get it done.
Okay, that makes sense. What before we leave the topic of IFCN, what are the biggest key learnings that you had in your career since starting that?
In my entrepreneurial career, when times get tough, stay with a positive goal picture.
Always be looking forward.
And tough could mean financial, it could mean team-wise, customer relations-wise. It could go tough everywhere. So, and it will go tough at a certain point of time. So, the key learning is once it gets tough, stick with a positive goal picture. Number one. Number two, the world is a very exciting place, and dairy is even more exciting. And uh, when I started my career, the key driver was to measure competitiveness, better understanding things for the coming WTO trade negotiations. And I thought, well, this is, I think now we got it and we knew how competitive. But I was surprised how complex and challenging the dairy sector is and will be. So, are there enough research questions? Yes, and that surprised me because I thought at a certain point you get it done and you solve the topic, but the world stays at a very exciting place.
No, that's great, and that's one thing I always like to hear about from people that have had 20 years of experience plus in what they've been doing. You really get that deep understanding of what key lessons to take away from where you're at. So I appreciate that. So you're in kind of a transition mode right now. And like most farmers have to deal with the issue of, or the opportunity of, succession. You're going through that with your business as well. So you want to explain to us a little bit about what that looks like, and also what's next for you?
Yeah, thank you, Paul. Look, like you on your farm, I had the last 20 years great advisors in a board which I chosen to report as an entrepreneur. And these guys told me already when I was 50, what's your succession model? And then I thought these guys are a little bit crazy, right? But I'm now turning 60 next year, and I was looking to some people who run a business like IFCN and reached 75 and 80, and I realized saying that's probably not too good for the business and the perspective of the idea that they've created. So we started with the board to identify who is a good long-term owner for a network like IFCN. And then what we did last year is we identified AV Agri as a company who has a strong commitment to dairy and want to drive progress in dairy. And they became now the shareholders, and they handed over the shares to that company. And at the same time, I'm very happy that my colleague Lukas Wojciechowski, who has been working 10 years with us, has been appointed to become the MD of IFCN. So I handed over the farm to the next generation, and now I'm in the transition mode of relearning, right? And after, if you have done 30 years of very long proactive work, it's quite hard to sit on the side and work once they have a problem, and not once you see it. There is a problem. So that's a very exciting learning.
Yeah, let's go into that. What you're doing right now.
Well, I act as the chairman of the advisory board in IFCN and help them to develop IFCN forward. So that's number one. I have taken up an educational role because I like to teach. So I have an appointment at University Kiel. I have a course there in dairy economics. And at the same time, I started a foundation to support dairy-related researchers and students. So currently, I'm able to support two PhD students in dairy economics, one from Nigeria, one from Albania. And so the teaching and supporting role is quite interesting for me. I'm still engaged in projects, for example, with GDP on pathways to dairy net zero. So that is a working area. And the last role, which I have a little bit intensified, I have been a dairy farmer in New Zealand the last 25 years. And we started there with some friends, a dairy farm those days with 120 hectares. And this we brought now to around 300 hectares, and I've intensified my engagement there. So my role is education, supporting, and farming.
That's great. That's great to see people give back through their careers and the talents and knowledge that they have, like you're doing. Appreciate that. What are some of the things that you did to prepare to do that? Or was that kind of after the fact, once you knew you were going to be stepping down as the leader of IFCN? Did you think about it then, or did you have to prepare yourself for quite a while to step into the new roles that you're in?
That's a good point. I think you have some of the ideas are old ideas which were on the shelf, but you didn't have time to activate them. Mm-hmm. And some, similar like to you, you have more ideas on the shelf than you could implement, right? That's right. That's normal thing. So the shelf was full, but then it's there's also something like a little bit of a destiny, right? So you are proactively searching for something, and something that there's a guiding hand moving you gently into a certain direction. And to feel this guiding hand is also an interesting part of making decisions. Basically, what I'm doing now is a result of a proactive work and some guiding impulses which I followed.
Well, that's great. So, Torsten, to close, I just want to have a quick chat about the dairy industry is very near and dear to both of us, and we're both kind of grew up into it and made careers out of it. Where do you see dairy in the future? What does that look like to you?
That's a good question. So, I would love that the confidence in the dairy industry as strong as its contribution to this planet. And that we are able to, with more pride, can share with the world what all these 1 billion people are doing to serve 7 or 8 billion people with food. So I think if it comes to the core, that if you can improve this image and self-confidence of people in the sector, that would be my vision.
That's what you want to see in the end of your career. That's great. So, all right. Well, Torsten Hemme, thank you so much for being here today on the AgCulture Podcast. It's been a pleasure. And we'll have your contact information in the show notes for anyone that would like to get a hold of you and get in touch with you. And as well as I just want to put a plug in, you're going to be having a conference here very shortly. You want to give us a few sentences about that?
The IFCN runs once a year a company for agribusiness companies to sort out two major questions. The first one is what will happen in the dairy industry in the next 15 months? And the second question is how will dairy look like in 10 years? This one will be in Poland from the 9th to the 11th of September. And it's basically the best think tank for companies to evaluate future ideas for the sector and to be best prepared for making your next year's budget and your next strategy plan. So if people want to join that one, I could strongly recommend that one.
That sounds great. And we'll put that link to that in our show notes as well. So again, Torsten, thank you so much for being here today on the AgCulture Podcast.
Thanks, Paul, and thanks for the wonderful work you do. I really enjoy what you do as a farmer, and you are very high on my positive examples for good image and spreading good my messages. So keep going. All the best for that.
All right. I appreciate the encouragement. Thanks so much. Thanks again so much for listening to this episode of the AgCulture Podcast with Torsten Hemme. I hope you enjoyed listening to Torsten's journey and his experiences and his knowledge and insights into the dairy industry worldwide. If you would like to reach out to Torsten, we'll have his contact information in our show notes, so check those out. And as always, if you've got any value out of this episode, which I hope you have, please pass it on to somebody that you know that would also enjoy it as well. That's how we grow our audience here at the AgCulture Podcast. I'm Paul Windemaller, and we will see you next week on another exciting episode of the AgCulture Podcast.